All right, welcome everyone. It is so good to have you all here. Thank you for joining us for our second edition of our Speaker Stories series. My name is Danielle. I'm the CEO of Women Talk Design, and I'll be helping facilitate our discussion today. And I would love to hear in the chat who joined us for our first speaker series last week, or whether this is your first event or not. This is going to be interactive. You're going to have lots of time to ask questions and chat. So I encourage you to start now. First event, fantastic. First, great. Well, this is a new series for us. And so I welcome you to this first one for you. It's our second one, and hope that you will be at many of these. Before I kick off and explain what this event's going to look like and then dive in and introduce you to our speaker, I do want to note that we have captions for this event. So if you'd like to follow along via captioning, you can look up and follow along live with Otter. You should see like a red button on the top. I'm also going to type it in here, so that URL in the chat, if you click on it, you will be able to follow along in a separate window and see the captions for the event. We'll also be recording this event, and so we'll follow up afterwards with a blog post and a link to the recording. So without further ado, excited to explain what's going to happen here. And Coraly, our speaker, was actually a big inspiration for this event. And so I'm excited to have her as our featured speaker this week. We really wanted an opportunity to be able to feature some of the different speakers in our community and tell their stories, because they really all have such unique backgrounds and ways that they got into speaking. And we really wanted to share how they got there to hopefully inspire you who are here to keep speaking, to start speaking, and provide you an opportunity to ask questions as well to our speakers. And so the way that this event is going to work is the first 20 minutes or so, I have some prepared questions that I'm going to ask our speaker. And then I am opening it up to you. So I really encourage you to think about, what are the questions that I care about? What do I want to hear Coraly speak to? I'll have you write your question in the chat, and then I'll call on you to unmute and speak up. So you're welcome to put those questions in throughout, but towards the second half of the event is when I'll specifically call for you to put questions in the chat. So again, start thinking like, what is it that I'm curious about? Why did I come here? What do I want to learn about? In the last 15 minutes, we invite you to stick around to meet one another. So this is something that last session we heard was really, really valuable for the folks that stuck around. We'll break you out into smaller groups using Zoom breakout rooms and have a couple of questions and prompts that you can meet each other, talk about where you are in your speaking journey and what you learned in the session. And so that's kind of our setup. That's what's going to happen today. I'll follow up afterwards with a feedback survey, because we always love to hear from you. But without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce our speaker. So we have Corley Rosario, who hails from the beautiful island of Puerto Rico. And she started her adventure over 12 years ago when she started speaking in graphic design and teaching. Later, her innate interests naturally evolved into a passion for UX and UI in games, working with companies like Beyond Games, Fingerprint Play, and Scopely, while continuing to teach others about user research and experience design in the games industry. She's currently a UX designer at Niantic, I don't know if I pronounced that right, she can correct me, LA, and she is also the VP of the Puerto Rican Game Developers Association, which is an initiative focused on growing and supporting the game dev community in Puerto Rico and beyond. And very excited to have her here today to share her experiences and story as a speaker. So please help me welcome Coraly.
Hey everyone. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you so much for everyone just coming in and joining us.
Awesome. So to get started, Coraly, I really want to hear about your journey as a speaker. And so I'd love to start us off if you can just share a bit about what are some of the topics right now that you are most interested or curious in speaking about. I know you shared you haven't done much speaking virtually since we've all been in quarantine, but what's on your mind right now? What are the topics you're most excited about?
So I'm a UX designer, and specifically UX designer in games. That's definitely one of probably 70%, 80% of the talks that I do are around that. Specifically within the game industry, there's not a whole lot of us. Like UX designers, like we're in little pockets here and there, and then once a year we kind of meet up, and then we kind of go off into our own different teams again. So seeing other UX designers is very rare, and a lot of teams that we've worked on across the board have never worked with UX designers before, or even know what UX is on just generally speaking. So a lot of the talks that I do are about UX design for producers, for game designers, for engineers, to really understand the process, so that when they are working with a UX designer, they at least have that introductory knowledge. And apart from that, I speak a lot on just the Latinx community. So for those who don't know, Latinx refers to the Latin American community, both in Puerto Rico, in the States, as well as like just different countries all around Latin America. And with the focus being on the community's development within the game industry as well, making sure people are getting the resources that they need. Aside from that, I'll talk about user research sometimes, because it does tie in directly into the user experience design that I do. And game breakdowns sometimes as well, especially with our community in Puerto Rico. It's great to show what is being done well from both user experience and game design aspect, and pointing out those little wins here and there within different types of games for a community that's like kind of early in its development. Things like that are like really, really important. But yeah, like for me, it's all about building community, really. That's why I do it.
Yeah. And I'm sure that strong drive for why is what helped you get started in the first place. And I'd love to focus a bit more on your story of how you got started. Because I know that you are someone who identifies as more quiet and maybe introverted, and public speaking can be really intimidating for a lot of folks who maybe don't view themselves as outgoing or extroverted. And I'm sure it was a journey for you too. So I'd love if you can speak a little bit more to how you first took that step to start speaking up, and how you got your first speaking engagement.
Sure. So like Danielle said, like I am an introvert. I am a huge introvert. Being in front of people is actually my worst nightmare. But when I started learning more about UX and understanding that there was this huge gap between the teams that we would be working on and what it is that I do, and then tied to that, like I do have a very kind of like educational personality. Like I was a teacher many years ago. And I think that kind of helped a little bit as well. Being a teacher for a year, that will definitely help kind of just calm down that anxiety that you get when you're on stage and stuff. But I started realizing that I was a really good teacher at just explaining what UX is and how to do proper UX for a variety of different people and different types of people, and bringing that knowledge down kind of in a way that we can speak the same language. So the first time I got approached for a speaking gig was actually in Sacramento. There's a game development community over there. It used to be IGDA. Now it's SDC, Sacramento Developers Collective, I believe. And this was like 5-6 years ago, I think. They wanted me to be a mentor during their game jam. And then they very impromptu said like, hey, we'd like to interview you on our Periscope. I'm like, oh, I'm not ready for this. Okay, let's do it. And I sat down next to one of their organizers, and they were just kind of like doing the live stream and just asking a bunch of questions. And I didn't feel as nervous as I thought I would feel in that sort of environment where it is just a live stream. There aren't people really in front of me at that point. So it's like, okay, I can handle this. After that, I did some workshops. Workshops were definitely a great way, especially for someone like me, to kind of like dip my toes into public speaking without it being something like feeling like there's so much pressure around you to almost kind of perform a little bit, because public speaking, you kind of do have to perform So I did workshops, and that really helped me ease me into the formal, okay, now we are going to, be standing in front of an audience talking about a very specific thing. This didn't happen like all at once either. This was like spaced out over several months within a year. And then the following year, I just started finding more and more opportunities to do public speaking, to do workshops, and supplementing both within my experience, and again, talking about my experience. It took a while to find my voice, though. I want to say that you're not going to get, everyone's different, 100%. But finding your voice with public speaking does take time. And for me, it took a little bit of time and a lot of feedback from different people to find that. But just going into it, I just tried a bunch of different things. And all of that led up to me being able to now say hey, yeah, I see that you're looking for speakers. I would love to be a speaker, please. and be more comfortable with it.
That's great. You shared a lot of good things there, both about pursuing different opportunities and also finding your own voice. I'd love to follow up a bit more on how you found opportunities. You said that at first someone reached out to you, but as you've continued to have your different opportunities, speaking and leading workshops, how have you gone about finding those?
So with the different communities that I'm a part of, I have a lot of networks through Sacramento, Bay Area. Now in LA, I'm starting to set up a bit of a network here too. And then back in Puerto Rico. So almost kind of organically, one way that I get just speaking opportunities is through the connections that I know. In Sacramento, for example, a week ago, they reached out to me hey, we're looking for people to do micro talks, and we would love for you to do another talk for us again. Yay, that's awesome. There's, let me see, what was another one? With EGLX, they reached out to me directly, hey, we want someone to talk about UX. We've seen you do talks at PAX. Can you just come here? We'll pay for everything. I'm yeah, that sounds great. Let's do it. And that was in Toronto, not last year, I think the year before. Otherwise, it's just me being really active on different types of social platforms and platforms like Slack and Discord, and just looking for usually within those types of communities, there's always a channel that's just dedicated to events, and people will just post a bunch of events that are coming up, and more often than not, especially if those events are really far along, they are doing call for proposals. So every time I see an event come in, if it's something that I would be interested in or I feel it's at my level, I'll go straight into the website and start looking for the call for proposals. If I see that there isn't one, I'll reach out via social media. I'm hey, do you have a call for proposals up? Are you looking for anyone else? The worst thing they can say is no, and that's great. And you move on. Otherwise, a lot of times yes, oh my God, we are looking for people. We're about to close the deadline or whatever. And you just go ahead and apply for it. In your group as well, Danielle, in Women Talk Design, people are always putting up their call for proposals there. Facebook has been a great tool for finding new conferences. Otherwise, if I don't know what's happening that year, there are lists on different websites of all the conferences that are going to be happening for that entire year period, from January to December and probably beyond, because they're recurring conferences. And typically for those, you could expect call for proposals about 4 months, anywhere between 2 to 4, maybe 6 months before the actual event. They'll have opportunities open, and they'll have it on their main website. And you can, just by looking for that conference, you can find what you're where you can submit anything. Aside from that,
No, that's a lot of great.
Yeah.
I love the idea of, I mean, it's both looking for your network, looking at call for proposals, and not being afraid to even just reach out to the event organizer if there's not one, which is
Mhm.
some good advice. I would be great to hear a bit more about your process of finding your voice that you mentioned. And maybe you can talk a bit too about how you go about now preparing for your talks and presentations. That might be two separate questions, but
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a bit more of how do you define what your voice is, and how have you gone about finding it?
So for me, again, I was a teacher for a few years back, and that kind of helped me understand that I'm a person that likes to explain things. Typically not so much opinion based, but just like, this is how this works, and this is how you can do the thing. All right, go ahead and do the thing. And also just kind of guiding other people to be able to acquire acquire and practice that skill set. So the first few talks that I did were very, very like technical, like very almost dry, because I thought that's how it had to be, you know, and I wasn't aware that there were other ways that you can achieve the same thing. One thing I knew for sure, and I learned this in the workshop, Danielle, I cannot do dead TED Talks to save my life. I cannot. I don't like the way I guess my brain works. It's actually very, very difficult for me to do a TED style talk. But I'm very, very good at using slides as a supplement. So whenever you see me doing a talk, I'll have slides next to me or somewhere near me. But the slides are more guiding me. And what I've come to realize, and what I've received back from people that watch my talks, is they like the authenticity that I bring. They like the honesty. They like that I'm sometimes kind of a little silly, and my deadpan humor as well. Like, people seem to like that. And that's how I started finding my voice. Like, okay, this is a talk, but I am the one giving the talk. So why don't I just be me giving the talk and see how that works? And so far, people really, really enjoy it. Like, they love watching me give these talks like this. And I incorporate a lot of humor. Some of the last talks that I've done have been more about my journey into games. And the way that I always present it is it doesn't matter where you're from or where you come from, it's probably going to be very relatable to you. But the slides are always part of my voice in a way. It's not just me talking and that's it. Like, the slides also show a bit of my personality in there. They again help supplement the story rather than tell the story directly. And that's how I found my voice. It's not really just me on my own. It's with the slides. Everyone is different. That's something that I learned as well. Some people are super comfortable just like laying it out there without anything else, and that is amazing. And I love it. And I love seeing people who are just, they're able to order the chaos that's in their heads with the slides. The slides provide that ordering for me. But for other people, especially someone like me, and especially someone who just wants to give you all the information that I know, part of using my voice is you know, using the slides. But yeah. And then go ahead, Danielle.
Oh, I was just going to say, one of the things Coraly is referring to is we hold a speaking workshop at Women Talk Design, and Coraly participated, and we do not teach slides in it. And so speakers have to present without the slides. And so
yeah, that was there's an interesting video out there of me like just completely butchering my talk, but precisely because of that. Like, again, I realized for me it's about, in my talks, I'm very I speak very organically. Like, I when I'm telling you my story, I have like my main points here and there, but everything that I'm telling you is very organic and very, again, comes from a very honest place. Honesty comes through. And rehearsing something that I pre-prepared for me just does not work. I can't.
And I really appreciated what you shared, that everyone has different styles.
Mm-hmm.
And like part of what you had to come to realize is that you can be yourself. You didn't have to be someone else. I think that's a really powerful message to share with everyone.
Yeah.
We're going to open it up to all of you in just a minute. So start thinking of your questions. You can start adding them into the chat. And I have just another question before that. But again, start adding in your own questions and thinking about what you want to ask Coraly. Coraly, the question that I have is around the advice that you have for new speakers. I know that you specifically have helped several folks who have to prepare for a speaking engagement, or who are on the fence about speaking, or don't know what to speak about or how to get started. And I'd love if you can share some of the advice that you've shared with them, or maybe even some of the best advice that you've received.
Well, what we talked about previously, it's okay to like be yourself in your talk. One of the things that I've found really interesting, not just seeing other people talk, but also again receiving feedback from others when they see me talk, is like they find me very relatable, very honest, very, very approachable. And in turn, it makes the information that I'm talking about very approachable as well. But that's just me. Like sometimes I feel like I create like a little speaker persona, but it's not that different from who I am. With other people, one of the things that I always recommend is like, just be you on stage. If you're a little bit silly, or if you're a little bit serious, or whatever type of personality that you have, how can you incorporate that into the talk that you're giving? This will vary depending on the types of talks, especially if it is a conference that's like super maybe technical, or just if the organizers just want people to be like very, very like, I don't even know how to describe it. Just very serious. Like there are still ways to incorporate a little bit of who you are into that. One thing I always recommend whenever you are trying to decide what to talk about, just list out the things that, one, either you're passionate about, or two, things you know about, or are an expert on. When I sit down with people, I kind of go over that list, and when I see something that catches my eye that I haven't really like seen too many deep dives on in different just conventions and everything, that's when I'll start like poking the person a little bit more. Hey, can you talk to me about this specific thing? Like, what are you thinking about when you want to talk about, object-oriented design or something like that? I don't know. And I try to like kind of pull the thread on that person's thoughts and their process and everything. And I ask them to tell me about their experience with that thing. And again, all of that just kind of helps cement why they want to talk about this specific topic. And once they find a topic that that they feel like they're really passionate on, and they feel like they really, really want to like, okay, let's go down the rabbit hole on this one. One thing I do, I show them examples of like what my talks are like and what other people's talks are like, and ask them specifically, like, what do you think you would be more just comfortable with? It's all about like you designing your talk, not other people designing your talk. And especially when conferences and expos are looking for a variety of different people to come and just present. After that, it's up to the person if they, again, want to do more of a TED style, like I'm just going to be on stage talking, there's nothing behind me, I don't have any other supplements, or if it is more like a slide. I typically help people more on the slide side of things, because more often than not, they just try to like cram all this information on one page, and there's no way. Unless you're doing a workshop, there's no way that you can do like a presentation like that with so much information that's only going to be like maybe 30 minutes long. So I work with the person to really like organize what content they should be covering and when, in a way that isn't going to like bog down the audience with just a wall of text. A lot of times I tell them, hey, instead of like specifically detailing out these things, could you maybe tell the same thing using an image? And then you are talking about what's happening in that image and what type of design this is. Images tend to work really, really well. And that was something I learned very early, again, when I was a teacher. And you're teaching kids that are in middle school and high school, they don't read. So you have to supplement with images. And honestly, from what I've seen so far, it's kind of the same with adults. Images tell a much clearer story than just a giant wall of text. But typically I'll sit down with the person together and just kind of like help them curate what this presentation can look like. And then after that, I mean, if they want to practice with me, that's cool. I don't mind. More often than not, I've seen people kind of like, oh, it's embarrassing. I don't want anyone to see me on camera. But if anything, one thing I do sometimes is I'll practice in front of a mirror a little bit. Not like the full presentation, because that actually embarrasses myself. But I'll practice over what I'll say and when I'll say it. And just look at, like, I use my hands a lot. So making sure that like the gestures that I'm using with my hands, like I'm not doing something offensive. Not that I'm gonna do that, but you never know. But as a Latin American, like we speak with our hands. And just looking at like, you know, how should I hold myself? How should I speak or emphasize something, like using my facial expressions, like that kind of stuff. I do tend to do that a little bit in little bursts, like here and there, not a full on, like I'm going to sit for the next 3 hours and just rehearse this. Other than that, like I, at least in my case, like I always go over things in my head in the days prior to the event, and just going through the outline. And if I ever remember, oh, right, there's this story that, like, an example of what happened that I think would be great to add to the specific subtopic within my topic, I'll write it down, then go back to my slides, see if it makes sense putting anything in there. That's something I would recommend if you are doing slides. But
there's a lot of good advice there. I think everything from like bringing someone in, as you were talking about, like you really helping pull ideas out of people. It's like the idea comes from them, but sometimes it's helpful to have someone, you know, ask you questions to help pull that idea out. And then finding your own voice and images are great, and running through your talk. So I think that's so much good advice that you put in there. That's great.
And two more pieces of advice, especially if you're a person that needs a lot of grounding. When I'm on stage, I know I get nervous sometimes. I always have like a little object with me that I just kind of keep in my hand and just kind of like fiddle with it a little bit. I make sure that it doesn't fall like it just did right now, but it just kind of helps me concentrate and not fidget as much with either the microphone or anything else that would be on me. That's something that I do before the expo or the talk actually begins, and then during. Because otherwise, there's one time it actually happened where like they gave me the microphone and I fiddled with it so much that the battery pack actually fell out.
Oh,
and I was just like, okay, I'm so sorry here. And then since then, like I keep little things either in my pockets or in my hand. The other thing I do to prepare, and this is like a few hours before or the day before, I make sure that whatever it is I'm wearing is really comfortable and cozy. And I do have a specific set of socks that I do wear during talks. They are my you can do this talk socks. They're like bananas on a skateboard, and they're green. And yeah.
I love that. I love having you can do this, whatever it is, socks or, you know, find the thing that works for you. That's great.
Yep.
We have a couple questions coming in the chat, so I'm going to call on these people to speak up and ask their questions. And again, everyone else who's in the audience here, this time is yours. So please think of what you want to ask Coraly, and we ask that you put it in the chat, and then we'll call on you to speak up. Joanne, you have a question you said about work environment. Do you want to unmute and ask the question to Coraly?
Hello, Joanne here. I wanted to ask, since I am also a UX designer, but kind of different because not for games, but more like for educational systems. But I wanted to ask, in your work environment, do you work with fellow UX designers? Like, do you have like a team of UX designers, or do you mostly work with like a team of devs and then you're the only designer? Like, how is it? How does that work with the games?
So within the game industry, my experience so far, I'm typically the only UX designer on a team. This is pretty common. I wouldn't say it's normal, but it's pretty common. The industry is still, I've been asked this like pretty recently. So if we were to look at phases of UX within different types of industries, with apps and web, it's definitely way farther along. Whereas with games, I want to say it's like in its adolescence or maybe teenage years, where, yeah, we have the foundation, we have a lot of the things that just make sense, but we still feel kind of gangly and kind of like, this arm is way too long for what it's supposed to be, kind of thing in regards to like UX things. So one of those things is definitely like, is a UI designer a UX designer? Can we have an artist be the UX designer? Do we only need one UX designer? Is a UX designer part of the product team? Are they own their own department? That kind of stuff. They're still figuring those things out. Some companies are way better at this. But in my case, again, my experience, I'm typically the only UX designer on most of the teams that I've been on. There's been maybe 2 companies I've been at where the other person might have been more like a visual designer, but they had UX experience, or it was a game designer with UX experience. Only in 2 situations did I work directly with a UX designer that was my senior. But right now, to give you an idea, I think we're a team of about 50 on the project that I'm currently on. I'm the only UX designer there. I'm mentoring one of our game designers to learn a little bit more about UX, and within our studio, there's only 2 UX designers total. And our studio, like in LA, is actually pretty big. So oftentimes you are going to be kind of alone. And that's where, you know, whenever I come onto a project, I have my kind of workshop ready and like my this is what UX is slide deck ready, because people have questions. And especially in the game industry, a lot of people haven't worked with many UX designers. So explaining to them what it is different, how UX is different from UI, how it's different from a game designer, how it's, you know, how I have to work with engineers and through the entire process, why I need to do that. I'm always explaining. I'm always teaching, always teaching.
It makes sense then that you started speaking about those things externally too, because of, you know, obviously something that a lot of people need to know and learn.
Yep.
Great. Thanks, Joanne. Our next question.
Thank you.
Awesome. Our next question is from Annie. Annie, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Hi, Coraly.
Hi.
So I was wondering, when you were starting out, if you got paid for the talks that you were doing, and if the conferences always had budgets for speakers, if you ever had to negotiate fees. Basically, like the whole compensation aspect is like a big mystery to me.
Yep.
So I was curious to hear what your experience has been like.
Most of, and that's a great question. And it's a question that I've even asked as well. So most of the speaking gigs I've done have been for smaller communities that I'm either already mentoring for, or I see it more as a volunteering opportunity. I'm okay with doing that, and I do that purposefully. Sometimes those communities will go ahead without my knowledge and just be like, here's $100. Thank you so much. And I'm just like, I didn't ask for this, you know. But whenever I go into those communities, I'm never really going into it knowing that I'm going to get paid. I'm well aware of that. And for me, that's completely okay, because that's not the point. For the bigger conferences, there's only been one so far that has actually paid me. And when they approached me specifically, they told me like, hey, it wasn't even that they paid me. It was, hey, we can't pay you because of tax reasons. Like, it was in Canada. But we can cover everything: your stay, your flight, your food, like everything that you're gonna need for this, we can cover it all. And that just to me sounded like a awesome vacation. So so I went ahead and said yes, like that's fine, that makes sense. And honestly, it went without a hitch. They took care of the hotel, they took care of our daily stipend for meals. I mean, that worked really, really well. As for events like GDC and PAX, where you're submitting proposals, you're typically not paid for that. However, they do give you like pretty much full access to the entire conference. So it is a ticket that, like for GDC, for example, a ticket that's worth $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, depending on which one they're giving. If it's the all access, I think it's like a $3,000 ticket. And maybe you can talk to them about getting discounts for the hotel, but more often than not, they don't actually like provide like your stay or anything. Discount, yes. But then you have full access to the entire event for several days. One thing that I'm doing on my end, especially with the PRGDA, is whenever we bring in speakers to talk to our community, I'll be I'm like super transparent and honest. Like, look, we are completely volunteer run. We are just an initiative. Like, we don't have, apart from like small donations, we don't really like get anything in. So I'm with that in mind, I am fully like prepared to pay you for an hour of your time. And people typically tell me like, oh my God, but I don't know how to even like charge. I'm like, well, I don't really know either, but if you want, just give me your hourly and I'll pay you your hourly or more. And most people accept it. Some people like are like, oh no, it's okay. You know, this is volunteering. This is like me helping the community out and stuff. And I'm like, are you sure? And I make sure that it's cool about that, and that's it. But one thing, because like a lot of the stuff that Danielle has been talking to us within Women in Games and making sure that people get paid and everything, like I'm trying to do what I can on my side, especially within our community, to make sure that people are getting paid as well. But aside from that, aside from like setting my hourly, I kind of just talk to the person and see like, hey, do you have a budget, and what is that budget? But right now, only 1 or 2 have paid me. Bigger conferences have paid me.
Great. Thanks for sharing, Coraly. I dropped an article in the chat too that shares some more information on getting paid to speak. And I think like Coraly shared, there's such different types of events, and I think different ones think about payment differently. But I love that last piece that you said, Coraly, of like just ask, right? It's always a great thing to ask. Luis had a couple of questions. Luis, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes. Hi. This is Louise. So my question is, currently I'm a graphic designer, and I've only just discovered like within last year that you could still be part of the gaming industry as a graphic designer. But from what I understand, do you have to be a UI UX designer? And if so, how did you transition from being a graphic designer to a UI UX in the gaming industry?
So let me address the first part of your question, and then I'll tell you my experience. So a graphic designer in the game industry is different from a UI designer, or it should be. Sometimes you will see roles that kind of like conflate the two, and it's kind of the same thing between UI and UX. That is two different roles. I mean, yes, we work together very closely, like almost completely merged together, but it is two different things that should be done by two different people, or ideally. Graphic design is kind of the same, where UI, graphic design, yes, there are skills that overlap, but they are two different functions within the game development pipeline. In this case, when it is a graphic designer, what I'm expecting when I hear that is someone who's dealing with marketing, is dealing with promos, any sort of like social media presence. Sometimes they might be brought into the development for like anything that would exist in the game's environment. Like let's say in the game you're playing inside of a city and there are posters inside that city, or like there's some sort of branding of like a company within that game. Those sorts of things, I would expect someone that is more on the graphic design side doing that work rather than just the UI designer.
Okay.
So yes, two separate things. But sometimes again, people think it's the same thing and they just kind of like, they slap the title on there, but then when you read through the requirements, you see that it's like, wait a minute, but they're talking about iconography and they're talking about like buttons and even animation and all this.
Yes, exactly. I was I was able to talk to someone about this, and when I mentioned that I was a graphic designer, they tried to recruit for a gaming company that they were starting up, and I was like, that's great. What exactly do you need? And they're like, well, the gaming industry needs a lot of UI UX designers, and we need a lot for it. And then it became a totally different topic. So I was very confused as to how you transition, or do you just blend it, or how did you go from, in your experience, from a graphic designer into UI or UX?
So for me, so I did start in graphic design, period. I did my bachelor's degree for graphic design. I worked at a printing company. Like I was just like print, like this is like pre-press. Yes. And then I kind of got like a little like, well, I feel like I could do more, you know? So I moved to San Francisco and I went ahead and did a master's degree in game development, because ever since I can remember, I've been playing games, not just digital, also physical. Like I'm really into Magic the Gathering. I've been playing for like forever. And this was my passion. And then there was this other piece, is like the graphic design side, which is, this is the thing I know. How can I like get that going?
Yeah.
So I went ahead and did my master's degree in game development with a specific focus on UI UX. So pretty much every single project that I was doing in the department was literally geared towards UI UX design. They didn't really have like a curriculum for it. They just kind of like, we just worked together to like mash something together, and that worked. And then everything else I supplemented with my own reading, trial and error, mentors, a lot of mentors, to really get up to speed at the same level of my other peers that, you know, they have their degrees in HCI or like they've been studying this specifically for a long time. Once I started in the industry, I did enter through a UI UX kind of role, because again, the industry, it's, you know, just having a UX designer as its own role and title, it's, I don't want to say it's new, but not every company understands the difference. And while I was like working through that, I I started realizing that I was leaning a lot more into the UX side of things, and I found that way more challenging and satisfying at the same time than the UI side. And that's how I shifted over into UX. But while I was in the UI side of things, I mean, I was creating all the buttons, all the iconography, all on top of that, all the wireframes, like the entire process, I was owning all of it. The only thing I wasn't owning was implementation, because in my case, I don't code. And generally speaking, we don't implement. We have our client side engineers that help us and we work with, and we work with them, and they implement everything. But I mean, yeah, like that's been kind of my process into it. Like I started in UI, started in graphic design, then into UI, and then UI UX, and then really shifted over into just UX. So, and that's where I've stayed for like the last 4 years now.
Great. Thank you, Elise, for the question, and thank you, Coraly, for
Thank you.
that. And I want to thank you, Coraly, for all of the stories and advice that you shared throughout this time, both of your personal speaking experience and your experience as a UX designer in games. And at the end of the session, we do want to leave time for folks to be able to meet one another. And so what I'm going to do is set up breakout rooms, and I encourage you all to stick around and join those rooms. I have a couple of questions that are prompts that you can ask one another, so you know what to talk about. And then we're gonna all come back for the last couple minutes. If you can't stick around, that's okay, you can head out. If you have any burning questions for Coraly, maybe she can stay here for a couple minutes here if you wanna ask one-on-one, and then we'll come back together and wrap it up. But again, I wanna say a huge thank you to Coraly, and thank you, all of you, for your questions and your advice and being here.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. And thank you everyone for joining us.
So I have created the breakout rooms. And yeah, thank you, Coraly. Oh, I haven't opened them yet. Open, okay, open, the rooms are open. Feel free to join. I will bring you all back in just a couple of minutes when we are gonna wrap things up.
Cool.